Good evening, Azeroth, and welcome to episode 154 of the World of Goldcraft. As usual, I'm your host, the Lazy Goldmaker of thelazygoldmaker.com. Welcome back to the show, guys. So yet again, not recording live, but there should be some streams again fairly soon. My wife's foot is healing, so we should be back to actually streaming and doing this live in the not too distant future. But for now, we are still offline, so if you're wherever you're listening or watching this on YouTube, then welcome. The podcast is made available by my patrons that, amongst other things, can get access to my full TSM setups for both Shadowlands and TBC, so if you're interested in that, head over to the patreon.com/thelazygoldmaker. So, what are we going to talk about today, or what am I going to talk about, I should say, because it is, after all, just me. So today I'm going to talk about something that came up in the YouTube comments on one of my videos. So I made a video a couple of weeks ago about talking through what it takes to reach the Burning Crusade gold cap. And someone commented that the economy on most servers is a train wreck. And I sort of challenged him a little bit, or asked him to elaborate, or at least said that what I see a lot of people saying that the economy in some game or on some server is broken or screwed up or whatever. But that doesn't really say anything, because in what way is it broken? That's the important part to know. It's generally used as a catch-all for just like, I don't know what people are mean, like maybe it's too easy, everything is too cheap relative to how much gold players have too much gold or too much currency, or it's too hard to make currency in the game. Like, it can mean anything, depending on the game and what sort of item economy or rarity scale or anything. Now, luckily the guy responded, and I really appreciate that, because he gave some specific details, and I think that's very interesting. We'll talk through some of them, and some of my observations about these things. Now, I've seen these types of complaints. There were a lot of them in Classic, for instance, that the Classic economy got broken by bots early on, or by layering early on, which I don't really understand what people were talking about, but whatever. I've seen it in other games that I play, like this is something that happens all the time in Escape from Tarkov, where the economy plays a huge part in what sort of gear players can have and run. And in other games as well. This is something that's on a lot of people's mind, and they talk about it in a very general sense, or a high enough level sense that you don't really understand, or it's not clear what people mean when they talk about a broken economy. So I thought we'd talk about that. Now we're gonna see what the commenter brought up, because what he was talking about is his server. Take my server, for instance, Sulfuras. Bots are so prevalent that farm goods are uncompetitive, consumables have virtually no margin, auctions sell slowly, and because volume of goods is so high for bots, they post auctions at material cost. It seems to be much more an issue of lower population server than anything, but it does make money making pretty grueling. And these are some extremely legitimate grievances. And what he's talking about does actually reflect an economy that is in some sense broken, in the fact that it's not helping normal players. And that's the important part. The economy is all about making sure that normal players can buy and sell the items that they have, and turn that into the useful items in the game, that they have access to those in a reasonable amount of time, and a reasonable level of farming. The main way that in-game economies break, in my opinion, is typically if some of these value-creating activities like farming, crafting, are not profitable. Because it means that some effort, that there's a lot of effort you could put in, but it wouldn't be rewarded. And this is typically happens if there is a very large difference in the rate of generation of resources between players. So if someone can generate a lot more materials per hour of playtime, maybe because they're running a bot 24/7, or because they're multi-boxing, or because they have access to a higher level in crafting skills, so they get a lot more, they can farm faster. Like, I mean, New World is designed around that paradigm, but that's fine. That's literally a design choice. They want that to give you an incentive to level up your trade skills. And everyone can get there. Or whether or not that's a reasonable amount of time to level logging to 200 or whatever is, of course, another question, but that doesn't really matter here. Whether this is generating materials or the cash equivalent in the game, it doesn't really matter. But if some group of players can generate these resources at a much higher rate, and we're talking rate in terms of hourly rate, obviously someone who plays 10 hours is going to generate more than someone who plays 1 hour. But if that guy who plays 10 hours also generates more per hour, then it's just going to accelerate the difference very, very quickly. This has a lot of negative effects. It has some negative effects on the actual economy, but it's also going to give you huge incentives for people on the low end of the playtime curve, which are typically people who have jobs, other things in their life, so they're not playing the game 24/7. So a lot of these people also have disposable income, and they will turn to RMT if they feel like they're falling too much behind. They might turn to botting, hacking, or, well, the RMT botting economy is also linked to hacking. I mean, I had my WoW account hacked back in the day in Wrath of the Lich King by some shady gold farmers or something, because when I got it back, like, my paladin was stuck underneath Northrend. They'd like glitched him through the floor and were using him to gather ore. Like, they'd vendored all of my stuff and sold all of my gold, or sent all of my gold off. So yeah. And botting is, of course, one of the causes of making gathering and crafting unprofitable for normal players. Because we know from the episode of the Auction House podcast that Censorful and Jack the Dipper did with a botter, that botters, they don't just gather, they also craft. And they use Trade Skill Master to cancel scan way more than you can ever do as a normal person. So bots contribute to all of the problems that the commenter on my YouTube video mentioned. Like, they generate too much materials, which makes the problem for botters is getting rid of all of their materials. Not getting rid of all of them for a reasonable profit, just getting rid of them for any profit. And then the same thing just happens for crafting, or just instead of like, okay, am I making a profit over my materials? Who cares? I just need to get rid of all my materials. Because when I'm running my bot 24 hours, then that's a ton of materials I need to sell every day. And yeah, that's going to screw up the economy. That's going to make maybe like 24 hours of farming for a bot is going to be valued at what would be 3 hours maybe of real playtime. So they're going to generate like 24 hours of farming in 3 hours of playtime for the botter. So like 1 hour is just going to lose a huge amount of value. 1 hour of normal farming for a regular Joe player. So yeah, that just screws everything up, because the materials are now for botters essentially free, and crafting is essentially free because they don't have a time cost at all when you're botting. Botting is just, of course, one example of this. If some players would have multi-boxing is another example of this. I've done a whole video on why I think botting and multi-boxing can be considered very bad for the game, because they create such large differences in efficiency between players. You can also have this by game design, of course, if you wanted to. That doesn't happen in WoW, so that's not really relevant. But if the difference is too large in the resources people can generate in an hour, then that's going to make it very, very hard for people on the low end of that curve to keep up with the economy and ever be able to pay for more expensive items, or ever be able to even engage meaningfully with the auction house. They'll barely be able to afford like the minimum. Now, one thing to notice with TBC in particular is that for consumables, even if things look unprofitable, they might not be. This is just an aside, almost a comment to that specific point. Alchemy almost always looks unprofitable if you just open up your Trade Skill Master crafting window. And in the Burning Crusade, you can just overcut. You can just post your stacks of 5 at 10-20% more than the cheapest one and get sales. I made so much gold selling that all throughout Classic and the Burning Crusade. So that is one way that you might be able to make some gold. It's a strong side, so do look into that. Now, obviously, the player population has a huge effect on the health of an economy as well. More players playing on a realm or playing the game means more players trading, means larger chance that someone will be buying your auctions, and more auctions available for sale. And eventually you reach a small enough population that certain niche items might be impossible or very hard to sell because there aren't people there. And so a single player can control the market to a significant degree, particularly if they're botting. Now, usually smaller population realms have higher profit margins because there's less competition. That's what we would expect in a vacuum. But you might also have the case with a smaller population realm, one botter at extra or less is going to be a much larger portion of the resources being generated on that realm. So if there's one botter and they're running like 10, 20 accounts, which is not what a lot of botters are doing, and the population isn't that high, then they're going to be generating an absolutely huge percentage of the resources of that realm, and that means that, well, they're going to dictate the market and just crash everything because they just need to sell all their stuff. That means the prices need to be low because they need to also sell consumables and herbs to the most casual of the casual, which wouldn't work at the high price. So yeah, that's ultimately one of the issues of potential issues of lower population realms. Like, one hardcore player is gonna be a much larger percentage of the resources in that realm, and that means that their efficiency is going to be the deciding factor for how valuable those items are, because they need to sell all their stuff, and they will drive down the price until they can actually sell all their stuff. So yeah, now there will always be differences between players in how much gold they have or how much gold they acquire, as long as you allow player trading, because players are not the same when it comes to economic optimization. Some people care about it, some don't. Some people have or bother to learn how to trade with other players effectively in any given game, understanding like the economic basics, being follow content creators like myself to understand that, and some people don't, and you can't really avoid that unless you discourage trading completely. You make it unprofitable to trade, but that would be pretty dumb in an MMO, because trading is an important part of making an MMO feel like a virtual world and not just a game, an instant game or whatever. So if you couldn't trade with other people, it would be a lot less interesting as a game. So that's inevitable. There will, after a while, some people will be astronomically rich compared to other players due to play hours and whether or not they care about generating a lot of in-game resources. So that's inevitable. You can combat that by giving the rich players tons of expensive things to spend gold on, cosmetics and stuff like that, so that they continuously draw gold out of the economy once it's funneled up to the rich ones. But the issue is, as I said, is that if there's a huge difference in hourly rate in terms of generating gold or resources, because it means that it's going to widen the difference very quickly. If you're one of the low efficiency players, then you don't have an incentive to farm or craft at all. It just doesn't make sense. So you essentially get two economies. And what's important about this is you essentially get two economies in terms of the basic day-to-day, I need this every day type of things. So stuff like consumables, there will be one economy for the players who have high efficiency. They can afford to pay a lot more for their daily consumables. And if they have a large enough resource pool, or maybe getting the resources to craft consumables is too hard, then maybe only the high efficiency people are the only ones who can afford to buy consumables regularly, and maybe the poor people can buy it once every other week, a full set of consumables for raid night or whatever. And that would of course be really bad as well, because then a lot of people just wouldn't feel like they're playing the game. In Shadowlands, Blizzard has generally managed to sort of avoid this. Consumables and gems and enchants are relatively cheap in Shadowlands. But then we have legendaries, which are super expensive. And a lot of casual players, or a lot of people who don't care about gold making, definitely did not have the gold to buy legendaries. I actually think that 9.0 was worse than 9.1 here. And that might surprise some of you. And the reason for that is Korthite crystals. Korthite crystals were the main reason why rank 6 legendaries were so expensive. And if you did Korthia from 9.1 launch up until the point where you had enough soul cinders to craft a rank 6, you probably had enough crystals for your rank 6 legendary. So you could have sold those crystals, and that would cover 70-80% of the cost of a rank 6 legendary, most likely. So it wouldn't be that expensive in real terms, because you have generated a lot of that value from just playing Korthia and doing dailies and all that jazz. Now, of course, if you didn't do that, then they were absolutely astronomically expensive, and they also, of course, the first week they were selling at absolutely ludicrous rates, but they went down before you could actually craft your legendaries, and actually needed to get the rank 6. In Classic, I saw an absolute ton of complaining about the economy. This was very popular among some of the big-time content creators, like talking about the Classic economy being broken and whatever. And in some ways it were, because the material spawns, the rate of material acquisition was just not scaled to the population density of realms. There were way more players, but the same spawn rate for items like Black Lotus. Which meant that they were relatively hard to get, extremely hard to get, relative to the demand. So flasks were overall just like insanely expensive throughout Classic. They required a lot of farming. To get like a flask, you probably needed to farm for an hour or two unless you were a mage. Then you could get away with less farming in terms of the gold required to get that. And that was actually pretty bad. Like the rate of being able to generate herbs was just a little too low. And meant that only people who had a lot of time to farm could afford to do consumables at a regular basis, or people who at least dedicated a decent amount of time to farming gold specifically for consumables. Some people might enjoy that. I think that's a good choice. But it's interesting. I mean, like flasks in Classic were selling for more than the TBC flasks they're selling for on my level or on my realm right now. And TBC has a lot more raw gold generation through quests, dailies, all that jazz. You get so much more raw gold in TBC. So that means in real terms, like they're so much cheaper now than they were in Classic. On my realm, I'm not seeing any of the big issues that Strongside is seeing. Although alchemy isn't showing much of a profit, but it almost never does. In fact, there doesn't seem to be that much of a botting problem for me. I can barely get enough ore to prospect. Now, ores might be something that bots just don't farm, of course. But getting enough adamantite to prospect is hard, and I'm selling stuff so fast. Now, I'm a hopeless optimist. I believe you can make gold on literally any realm. But you'll have to find the right niches, of course. And a high bot population relative to the normal player base will severely hamper your ability to make gold, if not kill it outright. So hopefully Blizzard keeps the bot population down and you can find the niches that work on your realms. And hopefully this was a little bit interesting. So that's going to be it for this week's episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it and you want to read more about gold making, head on over to thelazygoldmaker.com. If you want to support the show, then head over to patreon.com/thelazygoldmaker, and we'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye, guys!